extreme example of self-will run riot, and I don't think so. And I'll finally slow down enough to go, what the hell's wrong with me? And I'll realize it's my prayer meditation. I'm giving it lip service. I'm not really into it. So you know what? I'll make a commitment. I'll get up early. And you know what? I'm really doing my prayer and I'm really doing my meditation. And as I go out the door, I'm lined up with God. And I spend the whole day playing that spiritual game. Everything that happens is exactly what's supposed to be happening. And my job is to help whoever's in front of me. And I'll do that for 3-4 days in a row. And I got to tell you, it makes me feel so good, I'll stop doing it. Let's take lunch.
All right, do we have any more questions for the Ask It basket? Oh, we're writing some. Well, I'm going to turn it over to them and let them get started. We'll bring those up.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sheldon Fetty. I'm an alcoholic. First of all, I don't know who was responsible for lunch. Who put work into putting lunch together? He's still in the back. Well, when he comes in, no matter where we're at in the middle of it, let's just give him a round of applause, because wasn't that great? Right? I think that was great. We're gonna get him. We're gonna get him. So we're gonna go. Yeah! Woo! And I understand you just celebrated a year. That's great that you're in service and you're doing the right stuff, and you got a shot, regardless of what Amanda says. I think you got a shot. So this is a fun thing for Don and I to do. I love doing these Ask It basket kind of things. I want you to know, and I mentioned this yesterday, but I want you to know that what you got here with Don and I think that Don will agree, we've talked about this in the past, that it's so important as you go to these AA conferences that you understand, that I understand as a presenter, and that you understand as a listener, that you don't have guys up here with deep insight or great knowledge, or that are somehow spiritual giants, okay? You got a couple of knuckleheads that one of the gifts that God has given us, and it is a gift, is the ability to string words together and make them sound pretty. And that is the extent of our gift. Now, I've been doing this for a little over 21 years. Don's been doing this for over a quarter of a century. Obviously, along the way, unless we're completely insane, we're going to pick up a little insight and a little knowledge and a little bit of experience that we get to weave through our ability to communicate and to put ideas into words. So as we do the book study, and as we talk about the big book, we're just guys that have the ability to communicate. And when we answer these questions, I don't want anybody to think that you're getting the right answer. Right? You're getting an answer, right? And it's the answer that at this moment, while I stand behind this microphone, I believe is the right answer. But if you ask me the same question last year or next year, you might get a different answer. Because this is an experience. This is a journey that we're on together. So if you have anybody has any other questions, there's I think more time than there are questions. And if anybody's moved to ask a question they didn't write down and you want to, just kind of raise your hand or something, feel free to add a question in the mix that way also, if that's okay. So I'm just going to pick one out at random. I'll answer it first, and then I'll give the same question to my friend Don, and we'll go back and forth like this. Suppose you get a transfer sponsee. Do you start over in the steps, call every day, meet once a week, et cetera, et cetera? That's a great question. I have had the blessing of, I would say, more than half the guys I sponsor these days are not guys that are brand new. They're people that have been around the program for a while, and they've come to me with a certain amount of sobriety, and maybe they've drifted away from their sponsor, or maybe they feel like they're stagnant and they just want to get a new experience. And I don't have a pat answer to that question. I sit down with the guy and have a conversation with them about their experience and where they're at. And I have three things that I want to know. The first thing that I want to know is, are they working with new people? Are they actively looking for new people that they can sponsor? Because Gosh, if you're not doing that in Alcoholics Anonymous, if you're sober for a little while and you're not looking for opportunities to give this thing away, that's really a problem. And a lot of times when people are looking for a new experience, the new experience they're really looking for will be found with them taking new guys through the steps. That's really where the experience for them will happen. But the other two questions I have is, the first one is about inventory. Did you do an inventory? Did you come clean? Are there things in your life that currently are secrets that you haven't shared with anybody? Do you have any fresh, new resentments that we need to talk about? And if they do, then the next step that we're going to do is inventory. We're going to get right into writing inventory. And then the next question is what about amends? Where are you at in your amends process? Do you have amends that you haven't made? I make an assumption, and as I say this, the assumption doesn't sound like it's right, which happens a lot in my life. But I make an assumption if somebody's sober for a little while, that they have somewhat of an understanding of step one, not when it relates to the unmanageability of our life as we're living day to day, but the idea that drinking for them is probably a bad idea. And I make an assumption, and it may not be a good assumption, but I make an assumption that they're seeking God. And I make that assumption because they're coming to Alcoholics Anonymous. And so I make the assumption that they're seeking God. So as far as our first initial meeting, you're new to me, you're sober a while, you're new to me, I'm going to ask you 3 questions. Are you working with new people? Do you have things, secrets that need to be inventoried? And or where are you at in your amends process? And then, of course, beyond that, we're going to spend time together. And as we spend time together, we're going to revisit step 1 and 2 and 3 and the rest of the steps. And I'm going to encourage you to be revisiting those as you take new people through the steps. So that's my experience, John.
Non-alcoholic. Don't have a lot to add to that, but a little twist on that. Quite often somebody will come up to me and they'll say, are you willing to sponsor me? And I'll say, well, let me ask you a couple of things. First, are you currently being sponsored? And almost always they say, yes, I am. And I go, okay, well, if you're currently being sponsored, how long have you been with this guy? And they'll say, whatever length of time it is. And I'll say, well, why do you want to change sponsors? And then I get the list of what the sponsor's doing wrong and how they're spiritually falling down on their program of action and how they're not available and they're not this and they're not that. And I don't think that he's taking my sobriety seriously and I'm having trouble connecting with him and not. And when they get done with that, I go, wow, that really does sound like a problem. What does your sponsor have to say about that? And they'll go, what are you talking about? And I go, well, you just did a really job. You didn't even have to really think about it much. That stuff just flowed like a waterfall. Well, you've told them, right? Well, no. Oh, that's a problem. Listen, what I'd like you to do is go back to your sponsor, and I want you to tell them exactly what you just told me. Well, I don't know if I could do that. Why? I said, don't you think you owe them that at least to let them know there's a problem? Maybe there's another side of the story you don't know. And the reason I bring that up is about 50% of the time when the person goes back to their sponsor and tells them what they just told me, they work it out and they continue in their relationship. It's very important that people understand that sponsors are human, and sometimes they're not on their A game. Sometimes they're neglectful and they don't mean to be. Sometimes they have, I know this is shocking, they have other things in their life besides us. It's not always all about me. It should be, but it's not always about me. So I always try to encourage people to make sure that they're sponsoring them, that they have their sponsor's blessing to look for another sponsor. Now, if it's something where somebody's moved, they've moved into the area, they're looking for somebody locally, and one of the things was, do you have them call every day? Do you go through the steps again? I don't, for me, the first thing I do when I get a new sponsee is I have them over to the house. It's job one. I ask them, do you eat? And they go, well, yeah, I eat. Good. What do you like to eat? And they tell me, I go, good. And we make an appointment, say, come over for dinner. And we'll sit down and we'll share a meal. And we won't talk about Alcoholics Anonymous. We won't talk about the steps. We won't talk about anything. We'll just share a meal. And then we'll just hang out and we'll just talk and we'll get to know each other a little bit. And in that process, I'll introduce the questions as Sheldon eloquently talked. I want to find out where he's at in his current program. But I almost always, if I don't know somebody, I want to go through the steps. I may go through them very quickly. We may go through, because this is what everybody always says. Do you have any active resentments that are eating your lunch? No, I'm good. Okay. Yeah. Do you have any amends that you owe? No, not really. I think I'm all up to date. Of course you are. But well, I guess you should be sponsoring me then. And But what I like to do is I like going through the process, because if that's true, it's going to be really quick. It's going to be really lightning quick. It doesn't take very long. You can do it in an afternoon. But what usually happens in that process is the resentment starts showing up, the unmade amends start showing up. And the thing about calling, I do this with everybody I sponsor because it's done with me. It's always been done with me. Monday through Friday, you call every day. If you got anything on the weekend, the guys know I travel. You're welcome to call me on the weekend. I'll get back to you as soon as I can, you know. But the reason that we do that is we find as men, and I can't speak for women, I can just speak for the men, that it's easier for me to do something every day than remember to do it once a week or when I'm in trouble. I have a work habit that I've developed over years that I just call my sponsor at a certain time, around a certain time, about midday, Monday through Friday. And it's the check-in call. And most of the time I call in, I'm just like, hey man, I'm just checking in, nothing going on, just out working, just wanted to check in. He's like, great, have a good day, and that's it. But the thing is, because of that work habit, that when things do happen in my life, there's no hesitancy to call my sponsor. So I try to instill that with the guys I work with. And here's the other thing, guys don't always call every day. You know, I look at it as if you can't make a 30-second phone call once a day, how are you going to be able to do the other things in AA? But I understand we get busy, whatever. I meant to call. I set an alarm on my phone. I still didn't call. I call guys all the time. If I sponsor you and I don't hear from you, I call you. You know, this is a shoulder-to-shoulder deal for me. This isn't like, well, I'm the sponsor, you need to call me. If I haven't heard from a guy in a couple of days, I'll just call and I'll check in with them. And I'll say that, haven't heard from you in a couple of days, I'm sure you're fine, just wanted to hear your voice, give me a call back, let me know everything's good, love you. That's it. Then I don't, because I'm selfish and self-centered, and the minute I'm thinking about you, that means I'm not thinking about me, and we got to get back to thinking about me, so I'll call you. So that's all I got. Huh. Wait. Time going through the steps. How long? Do you say a newcomer, let's see, do you say a newcomer takes through the steps? I think they're asking how long it should take to go through the steps. 47 days. We tried to do it in 46. We were killing people all over the place. We went to 48 and we were losing about half of them. 47, great success rate. Okay. Fearless and thorough from the very start is our timeline. Fearless and thorough from the very start. Now, as we've gone through the steps so far, we've pointed out some indications of time as we go through the steps that are in the big book. And they talk about how quickly we go through this. Now, let's go historical. When Alcoholics Anonymous first started, what they used to do in Akron is they would pull you aside and they would take you upstairs to Dr. Bob's bedroom. They call it the third step bedroom. And until you could take the first 3 steps and take that third step on your knee with one of the members, there was no point in joining the other guys in the main room. That if you weren't convinced and ready to take those first 3 steps, there was no point in going on with the rest of the program. One of our co-founders, Dr. Bob, in his stories point out he made his amends his first day of sobriety. That's just his experience. So we're not suggesting you make your amends on your first day of sobriety. We're not saying that. But I think we think that somehow a prolonged experience with the steps will increase its accuracy and our proficiency with it. Now, and I would agree with that if it was a one and done deal. If this was a curriculum where I'm only going to go through it once in perfection, I better get it done right or I won't pass, then I think you should go through it slowly. But that's not what we're doing here. What we're trying to do is get introduced to these spiritual tools as quickly as possible so then we can go practice with them for the rest of our life. I don't think you have to worry about writing the perfect inventory. I don't think you have to worry about your level of sincerity as you go through the first 3 steps. I don't think you have to worry about if you really understand the deep spiritual significance of 6 and 7. And I don't think you have to worry about your amends other than that you made them. The only amends that are wrong are the ones you didn't make. A lot of us, if we had a time machine, we'd go back to certain situations with amends we've made, and maybe we would have done them a little differently. We do the best we can. But fearless and thorough from the very start is really what it is. We don't want to delay. And I'm just of that opinion on being here for quite some time and watching what happens with people that squander that huge resource we bring in, which is our desperation. Because what can happen here is physical sobriety can masquerade as recovery. You see, I come in here, I'm unemployed, I haven't worked in a year, I'm in bad health, nobody's talking to me, my life's in the crapper. Bill Wilson used to say, the good is the enemy of the best. So I will come in here and I'll get a job and I'll have some money in my pocket like Sheldon says, and I'll get out of trouble in the family. Now they're talking to me and I'm going to work every day and I'm going to a lot of meetings and I'm feeling better because you've removed alcohol from me. And I'm going to a lot of meetings and I have meeting-based recovery, but I'm not into the steps. I'm going to do that, but I'm not doing that once. But what will happen eventually to a guy like me is the things that I think, I have a list in my mind. When I come to Alcoholics Anonymous, and one list is the trouble I'm in. The other list is the things I've never had in my life that I'm sure if I had them, I'd be happy. So what happens in AA is I start taking care of that first list, all the trouble I'm in. Because I know if that list is taken care of down the bottom, it says equals happy. And so what happens is I get out of debt and I pay back all that money and I clean up those warrants and I get to work and I start doing these things. And I'm surprised when all that's done, when all the trouble in my life, the consequences of my drinking are taken care of, it's better, but I can't really say I'm happy. And then I've got the other list in my mind that I think, man, if these things happen, I know I'd never have a bad day. Because I hear guys talk about falling in love and meeting the woman of their dreams. What would that be like? And becoming somebody that really has a career and makes a living, is able to pay their bills and really save up for the future and have a future. And what would that feel like? And maybe even become a homeowner and all these things I'd hear about, these blessings of life, these outside things that turn out don't have a lot to do with recovery from alcoholism. But I go and I get those things in my life, and I'm surprised that they leave me feeling strangely hollow because I was so sure that they were the answer. And there's nothing wrong with those things, but when I hang my hat on that hook of recovery, I can find myself let down. So I think it's important that you don't get your life together and now I'm ready for God. I am perfect for God in a new experience when I'm in Alcoholics Anonymous broken in half, because my willingness will never be higher than when I'm new. I mean, I like to think I'm a good card-carrying member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I think that way of my friend Sheldon. I would like to think if you ask me to do anything in AA, if I'm capable of doing it, I will say yes. That's my operative word. There's nothing I wouldn't do for AA. I would like to think of myself as a willing member. Having said that, the willingness that I possess today pales in comparison to the willingness I had my first 30 days. My first 30 days, I was doing stuff that a sponsor was telling me to do, and I didn't even know the guy yet. And why do I think that willingness was so far superior? I was taking actions I didn't know worked yet. I had no idea they actually worked, yet I was doing it anyway. It's much easier for me to do it today because I've had the change in my life. Not only do I believe in AA, I know it works because it's happened to me. I didn't know that when I was new. I think when we have these new people, we're so afraid to damage them. I don't think they're ready. I'm telling you, my guys, we get into the steps and we don't stop. Now, some people go through it faster than others, but we start and we don't stop. We keep moving forward. Most of the trouble I see people get into in early recovery is a direct result of stopping. I've never heard anybody go, yeah, he got drunk, what happened? I got to tell you, he was working the steps way too hard. Oh my God, all he was doing was step, and helping others and seeking God. And, no wonder haven't heard it yet. Haven't heard it. So.
There was a line or a cliche that used to get thrown around a lot. You don't hear it very much anymore, which I'm grateful for. But people would say a lot in meetings when I first got sober, slow is real. Yeah, right, slow is real. And I got this lunatic for a sponsor. I mean, the guy's a crazy man, right? I meet him, and I'm 3 days sober, and he wants me to read the doctor's opinion. I mean, he's like, I read that, and the next thing you know, I'm reading There Is a Solution, and then more about alcoholism. I'm less than a week sober, and this crazy man's got me reading 60 through 63, and he's rushing me through the steps, and I feel like I'm just being, hurtled along. And I went to this other old-timer. The guy's name was John. I said, John, this guy, I don't understand. Everyone in the meetings is telling me slow is real. There was a thing people used to say, 1 step a year, right? You need to do one step a year. Very important that you don't go any faster than one. And I go, John, this guy's killing me. I'm not even 30 days sober yet, and he's got me writing my inventory. And the old time John laughed. He said, you got to imagine that you're a drowning man. In Vegas, just outside of Vegas, we got Lake Mead, huge, big, deep lake. He said, imagine you're in Lake Mead, and you're drowning. And you're treading water, and you're able to keep just above the surface of the water. How long can you tread water for? When do you want the life preserver? Do you want us to throw it to you now, or do you want us to wait a little while? Some people have some strength that I don't have. There are people that I've met in Alcoholics Anonymous that are able to stay sober just on meetings, and they're able to put up with the emotional pain and what I would call being a dry drunk. They're able to they can stay sober and they're fine. I'm not that guy. 30, 60 days, I'm going to need some kind of relief. But even the people that are able to stay sober without doing the work, why would you want to do that? We talk about meeting-based sobriety, and the cliche that you will hear a lot of meeting makers make it, meeting makers make it. And then we talk in this kind of a fellowship, we talk about how that's nonsense. I don't mean to make it sound like meetings are a bad idea. They're a wonderful idea. Our friend Paul said the funniest thing. First time I heard him say this, I thought, that's spot on. He says, a lot of meetings make it easy. Few meetings make it hard. No meetings make it impossible, right? And I believe that. I think meetings are really important. We shouldn't down-talk meetings so the newcomer thinks, well, I'm only going to one meeting a week. They're crap anyway. Who cares, right? I mean, we want to encourage people to attend meetings, but just to attend meetings isn't enough. And the big book gives this timeline. It talks about next relaunched in step 4, and at the end of step 5, it says, go home and rest for an hour, right? It's giving you this idea of a timeline. I did my inventory with my sponsor. I happen to remember I was 27 days sober when I shared my 4th step with my sponsor. I think if I'd have waited much longer than that, I might not have made it. But here's what I watch happen, and here's why I encourage guys to do the steps as quickly as possible. When I first show up at Alcoholics Anonymous, I know I did it. I mean, I'm new. I showed up here. I got this all-important desperation that Don's talking about, and boy, I'm dying, and it's my fault, and I'll do it. But as I work through these lists that he's talking about, and you show up to work a couple of 3 or 4 days in a row, you get a paycheck or 2, you get 3 hots and a cot, you eat a little, sleep a little, you wash some clothes, take a shower, you start to feel better. And after a little while, you start to feel so much better just from physical sobriety that you start to think, well, you know what, I got this now. The problem is that I still got the resentments. So I'm still angry at my mom, my dad, my boss, my wife. I'm still frustrated with my son, my neighbor, my coworkers, the people in AA. And if I stay sober for too long without working an inventory, what will become apparent to me and impossible to change, or very difficult to change, is that I'm sober, I'm doing well, but you're all idiots. And it's no longer my fault, and it becomes your fault. And once in my mind clearly solidified is that it's not my fault, it's your fault, it's a very difficult thing to turn around. And then if I do stay sober, I'm not happy about my sobriety. But I have learned one thing, and it says it in the book also, and working with others. I don't pressure guys. I meet guys at their point of willingness. I tell them my experience. My experience is you need to do the steps as quickly as possible. My experience is that if you're not actively working on the next step, then you're stagnant. And in nature, you're either growing or you're dying. And if you ain't growing, I got news for you, you're dying. And I encourage people to do more. But if a guy doesn't want to do more, I don't push him. I say, look, this is my experience. This is what I think you should do, but I'm not going to browbeat you or bully you. The book warns against if we push a guy too hard, and then he doesn't stay sober for a myriad of different reasons, then he'll start to think that the steps are the problem, and we can do more harm than good, and the book warns us against that. So I'm an encourager. I'm not a bully. I'm a cheerleader. I'm not really a coach. I recommend and suggest you do more and you do it faster. But if you don't want to, I would rather spend my time on the guy that wants to than wasting my time on the guy that doesn't. So I hope that answers the question. Yes. I agree with you, Don. Do you agree with me, Don? Oh, yes. Don and I agree with each other, which is just, well, yes. I think you're wonderful. How do you feel about me? Wonderful, fantastic, good. Okay. This question is based on something that Don had said earlier on. Please discuss the spirit of the third and seventh step. Please discuss the spirit of the third and seventh step. So in step 3, I got my sponsor's voice running around my head right now, and something he says all the time that I love. He says, step 3 is about simply this. It's about making my life none of my business. I'm going to get out of the way. I'm going to ask God to take over. I'm going to hand him the reins. I'm going to say, Pops, just you do it because I can't. And why would I say that? Well, you know, based on my experience, based on my life, if you're stood in the middle of my life, by the time I get to a point where I'm willing to take a third step honestly, I'm probably not doing so well. Most of us don't show up in AA and say this. Work is great. I got this amazing career. I got a lot of respect. I'm making plenty of money. I love my boss. I love the people I work with. Everything is fantastic at work. Home life, unbelievable. Unbelievable. I mean, I got to tell you, my wife and I can't think of a time where we haven't both been horny on the same day. I mean, it's fantastic. She's a great cook. I love her. She does a great job with the laundry. House is clean. I mean, just unbelievable. My marriage is, the kids, you've never met children like mine. They are, I think at least one, if not both, will be saints before that. It's incredible. But I got this drinking problem. And other than the drinking, everything else is just fine. You know, typically the way we show up to AA is more like this. Yeah, I know I drink too much, but that's not really the problem. The problem is her, it, them, the job, and if they just leave me alone I agree I drink too much. That's one of the problems. My life is just a disaster in every area. And so what I'm trying to say in step 3 is I'm trying to say, Pops, I've tried, and I can't. I've tried, and I can't. And in step 4 and 5, I take a look at my life and I identify why I can't. What is it about my reaction to life that makes it impossible? Why is it? We were talking at the break about one of our friends that's got this big button that his boss likes to push, right? Not only what are the buttons, but why do I put them there? Why do I polish them, and why do I make sure they function correctly? Right? Because that's what I do. I am the manufacturer of the buttons, the maintenance guy of the buttons, and the janitor polishing the buttons. And if you talk to me long enough, part of the way through the conversation, I will say, oh, and by the way, I have this button here. And if you push it, you'll find it entertaining. So why do I have the buttons? What do the buttons do? How did I wire the buttons? What is it about the way that I run my life that makes everything a disaster? And then in step 7, I say to Pops, I say, hey, can you take the goddamn buttons away? Can I give you the buttons? Can you remove from me the things that are destroying me? You know, I'm not a Bible guy, obviously. I'm what I really am. Someone was asking me at the break. I'm not a practicing Jew. I love Eastern philosophy is the way that I read and study today. I'd like to be a Buddhist. I'm not, because I'm not that dedicated to anything. But if I had any more dedication in me, I'd probably be, I'd be a Buddhist Jew. I'd be a Jubu, is what I would be. I'd like to be a Jubu. But in the Bible, there is a teaching that says that God will not do for you what you can do for yourself. And in step 3, I say, God, do everything. And in step 7, I start to identify the things that I can do and should do myself and the things that I want God to do. And in step 7, I want God to remove from me the things that are blocking me from him.
Yeah, talking about the spirit of the 3rd step and the 7th step. Well, for me, it's approach to what? How I live my life. When we say, I have a spiritual approach to living, what does that mean? Well, the spirit of the 3rd step for me is offering myself, that I want to have this relationship with God. I don't even know what that means, and I don't know how to evoke that. I don't know how to get that done, but I'm willing to have this. I make a decision that I'm going to turn my will and life over to the care of God. The actions we talk about in 4 through 9 is how that happens. One way to look at it is, the 3rd step is your sponsor walks you over to the cliff, and there's an abyss there, and you look down and you don't see anything. And about the time you're thinking, there's nothing down there, your sponsor goes, jump. And you look again, and there's nothing there, and you turn to your sponsor, you go, you jump. And he smiles and goes, I already did. And you ask, well, what's going to happen? He goes, I have no idea, but we're going to stay and watch. And really, the 3rd step, the real dilemma of the 3rd step for me is I like the idea of a spiritual way of living. I like that based on the failure of my life and what I've already seen in Alcoholics Anonymous on people that have recovered from a hopeless state of mind and body. You make it look good. But there's this nagging question I can't answer, which is, what do I get? What do I get? What's in it for me? So what I'm really asking God in the 3rd step is a question, and the question is, can I trust you? If I do this and I go on this journey, I'm risking everything. That may not seem like a lot when I'm new, but it's everything I've got. I'm talking about a big decision. I'm going to turn my will and life over to this power that I don't fully understand yet. So I'm asking God, can I trust you? And in the 7th step, after the work I've done, when I go back to God and I offer myself to him in service to him and his kids, God gets to ask me the same question. Can I trust you? And the answer is the same. When I ask God if I can trust him, God says yes. And by the time I'm at the 7th step, when God asks me that, I can say yes. You see, there's a difference between having a relationship with God and having a relationship with God that works. There's a difference between knowing that I should be of service and these things will serve me well and wanting to be of service. You see, when it becomes a spiritual piece of business that I want this relationship with God, that I want to be of service, that I want to approach my life that way, it's no longer work. And it felt like work in the beginning because it was so abstract for me. It was so unnatural. God, I got to remember to think of others. How do you do that? I couldn't remember to think of God. I mean, I'm the guy that has Post-it notes in my mirror, inside my wallet, on the dash of my truck, everywhere you can see, and it just says the word God. I'm doing everything I can to remember just to think about God. But as we go through the steps, a lot of stuff in me gets taken care of. A lot of stuff gets rearranged in the way that it needs to be arranged. A lot of debris that's on the path between me and God gets cleared out of the way. And I'm starting to get a clearer message, and I'm starting to have a better life, and I'm starting to want this relationship. And so what's the approach? What's the spirit? What do I carry in me as I go through the day? I want to serve God and his kids. I want to understand the nature of my relationship with God, which is he's management and I'm labor. And I'm okay with that. I want to understand. I remember being confused about this service to others and going to my first sponsor and saying, I understand I have to help people, but there's so many people. And I mean, who deserves it? Who doesn't deserve it? Who am I supposed to help? How will I know? And he said, oh, Don, God made you. He knows everything about you. And he knows you're not that bright. So the people you're supposed to help, he's going to make it easy on a guy like you. He's going to put them right in front of you. So when you find somebody standing right in front of you, be assured that God put that person there at this point in space and time, and your only job is to try to be helpful to them. And I've never forgotten that. And there have been times in my sobriety where I found myself with a guy standing in front of me, and this is what I thought. This one too, God? This one too? So I hope that answers that a little bit for you. He's going to answer that next. Okay. In your home groups, are there more open or closed meetings, and why does our group choose one over the other? God, I got a great, all right, I got to be careful. All right. I'm going to step into the muddy waters of opinion here, but that's all I've got to deal with. Open and closed meetings. So first of all, I'm assuming everybody understands what the difference between an open and closed meeting. All right. Where I live, there are mostly open meetings. There are a couple of closed meetings. All right. My home group, when I first started attending it, was a closed meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm not a big fan of closed meetings, and this is why. When I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I didn't know what I was. I had an extensive drug background, which up to this point, I have not spoken of, you've noticed. I have very little difficulty honoring singleness of purpose in Alcoholics Anonymous. I've been speaking from podiums in Alcoholics Anonymous all over the country for over 10 years plus. I've been giving main talks in AA since I was 2 years sober. I've never talked about drugs. It's not difficult for me. I had old-timers tell me that this is AA, we talk about drinking, we don't do that here. No, I got no problem. I'm just a guest at your party. I want to be a good guest. I'll follow the rules. I got no big deal. I find it interesting that people that have a problem with singleness of purpose say things. I've had guys I sponsor that find it necessary to talk about drugs in Alcoholics Anonymous, for example. They'll say, hey man, it's just my story. And I'll go, well, yeah, but I've heard your fifth step. I know parts of your story you don't share in AA. So it's very funny how we'll pick and choose what we're going to share in Alcoholics Anonymous. But my opinion about the closed meetings is I think the closed meetings in the beginning in Alcoholics Anonymous were created for one reason only. We understood that meetings were open to the press. They were open to family members. They were open to the clergy. They were open to anybody, the medical community. Anybody that had an interest in Alcoholics Anonymous could come to an open meeting and they could observe what happened in Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, because of the spirit of anonymity and because we had members, it was very important to them, particularly in our early days, that their membership remained secret, that it may have hurt them in their professional life. If people were to find out they were a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, they might have been judged harshly. Business rivals might have used it against them. Anonymity was very, very important to these people. So they went to closed meetings where they were assured that everybody in that meeting was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And there was a comfort in that for them. But what I think the closed meeting has morphed into in later years in Alcoholics Anonymous is some type of defense system, wall that we've put up to make sure that the evil drug doers don't end up in AA. And what we're trying to do is control our environment in Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't want to hear a bunch of drug talk. I don't want to hear a bunch of junkies in there talking about their stuff. I don't want to. So we want to make sure that everybody that arrives in Alcoholics Anonymous is an alcoholic of our kind, that we can approve of that type of loser, you know. So I start going to this meeting, and it's a closed meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. So the very first inventory our group had, I asked the question, I go, why are we a closed meeting? And nobody could really answer it. And one guy said, okay, well, to be honest, we have a closed meeting because we didn't want a bunch of drug talk in our meeting. Now, I'd been going to the meeting for about a year at that time. And I said, well, guys, let me tell you a secret. It ain't working. You may be a closed meeting, but we occasionally hear guys talking about drugs. That happens in Alcoholics Anonymous. And this is my concern. If we really believe in what we have, and we really think we have something to offer the still suffering alcoholic, are we going to close ourselves off? Are we afraid that somebody that perhaps isn't an alcoholic is going to come into our meetings and corrupt it? But are we keeping the guys out of AA that haven't gotten a proper diagnosis yet? You see, when I came to AA, I hadn't had a diagnosis. I didn't know if I was an alcoholic. I didn't know if I was a drug addict. I didn't know what I was. I had a lot of trouble in my life because of both of those areas. Until I got a sponsor and started going through the work in the book, primarily in the doctor's opinion, I didn't know what I was. And when I read the doctor's opinion with a sponsor, we started looking at the phenomena of craving, the allergic reaction, the obsessive mind, the spiritual malady. I went, oh my God, that's it. I'm an alcoholic. And I identified with the description of alcoholism contained in the doctor's opinion, and I've never looked back. I am so grateful that when I arrived at Alcoholics Anonymous, September 16th, 1991, I showed up at an open meeting. Because if I had showed up at a closed meeting and someone at the door said, "Hi, this is a closed meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, we need to know, are you an alcoholic or are you a drug addict? What are you?" I would have said, "I don't know what I am, man. I'm just trying to get the heat off." And they said, "Well, if you can't say you're an alcoholic, you can't come in." You'd have a different speaker this weekend. Because I didn't have the strength to sit and debate. I was able to get into a room and just be left alone and have a safe place to be for a little bit until they 12-stepped me my second night of recovery. Thanks.
I was concerned that we weren't going to have enough questions to fill the hour, and then I remembered it's Don and I. So this question says, Sheldon, last night you said that Bob told you to stop having a way. How do you stop having a way? Anybody? I'd like to open this one up to the floor. Anybody got any ideas? The point of the question, when it was asked to me, and the point of the answer, when it was told to me, and the point of the question and the answer when I say it to guys that I sponsor, isn't that there is a way to accomplish that. It's that is what you have to realize is the problem. I mean, I can't not have a way. I can't not have an opinion. It's impossible for me not to have judgment. It's impossible for me not to want things. Of course, listen, I have a great life. We have a beautiful home. There are problems. It's a little small, to be honest. I mean, the carpet's it could use some things, right? Business is okay. I want more. I want more of everything. I want more of everything. The point of the question and the point of the answer is for me to realize that when those things get out of control, that when the fear that I won't get enough creates the resentment and the separation, the understanding of what the problem really is. Nobody expects me, and I don't expect anybody to turn into this automatron that walks around where everything's fine, oh, I got sick. Good. God did it. Must be good. Oh, we're going out of business. Let's have a sale. We'll have a going out of business. Good. Good. Everything's good. That's not the point. The point is for me to identify the angst, because here's how I've always lived my life. In angst and your fault. In angst and your fault. And hopefully the lesson that I can learn in Alcoholics Anonymous is that I'm in angst and I'm a volunteer for it. I'm in angst and I'm the guy that's creating the angst. And just to the extent that I can try and submit to God's will to say, you know what, things are the way they're supposed to be. Just to that extent is the extent that I'll have serenity and peace. But I think that it's an old joke I'm going to try and change, and we'll see if we can change it to make it work. We'll give it a shot. There are two kinds of people in Alcoholics Anonymous. Those that struggle because they don't get their own way, and liars.
How do you specifically connect with God? A lot of people don't know this. It involves the left elbow. We start with the left elbow. A lot of people think it's the knees because of prayer. It's not. There's so much to do. Specifically, anytime, anywhere I want. I'll show you. God, I know you're here right now. We are having an awesome time in Alabama. These people are so kind and so sweet. And I got to tell you, I didn't want to come this weekend. I got a lot going on in my life. I've been really busy, as you know. I'm glad you let me know it was a good idea to be here. I'm so glad I have friends that thought enough to invite me and Sheldon. You know, we're having a great time. I'm wondering, where would I be if not here? What are the little people doing today? I'm having an outstanding time. Thank you for allowing me to be wrong one more time in my life. That's how you connect with God. Anytime you want, anywhere.
So we just learned that the short answers are the true answers. Which means I haven't told the truth all weekend. The answer to the question, I agree with Don, isn't just anytime, anywhere. It's actually specifically now. Now. You can't make an appointment to get with God. The answer is now. It's the only place He exists. How do you know when you should, or if you should, change sponsors? It's a great question. I've had the same sponsor since my entrance in Alcoholics Anonymous. Next month will be 22 years. I was a week sober when I met Bob. During that time, we've had an amazing relationship. He's more like a father to me than my own dad was. I'm in love with the guy. We've had businesses together. We've owned businesses together. Gone on vacations together. We've shared holidays together. We've laughed together and we've cried together. And as in any relationship, a couple of times, I've wanted to kill the SOB. I wish that I could tell you, but that's all about 10 years in the past. But as Don so well knows, at the end of last year, beginning of this year, there was separation between me and my sponsor. And it was very uncomfortable for me. And I was going to change sponsors. And that was very scary for me because I've had the same sponsor for 2 decades. So I call up a guy and I say, hey, I think I want to change sponsors. And, you know, it's a funny thing. We're funny people. Some guys you ask that, you say that to, and it's like they're collecting sponsees. So they're glad for the call and they just want to be helpful. But thankfully, the guy that I called was Don. And Don asked me those questions that he talked about 15, 20 minutes ago. And I wrote an inventory, one that I could not share with my sponsor, because it just had his name on it. And I flew up to the spiritual center of the Northwest, to Bellingham, and I shared that inventory with Don. Here's my experience, having been sponsored by the same guy for over 2 decades. There's a couple of things that have happened when him and I have struggled, and I felt like it's time for me to change sponsors. More so early on, but also in current times. When I feel like I need to change sponsors, it's because he's giving me direction that I don't agree with. And I don't want to take the direction. And so instead of talking about the direction and working it out and figuring out, hey, and then taking the direction anyway, being sponsorable, taking the direction that I'm given. Because otherwise what I'm saying is that my life was unmanageable, but now it is manageable and I'm taking back the reins. So instead of that, what I do is I start to look closely at his life. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. We're not saints. If you follow me around with a notebook and a list of principles, trust me, it will not take you very long to decide I'm not the guy you want to take direction from. I am flawed and I am broken and I make mistakes. And it is the reality of me. But when my sponsors give me direction that I don't want to take, in order to defend myself from not taking that direction, I'll get out my magnifying glass and start watching him in his life so I can character assassinate him and come up with reasons why I don't need to take his direction. And that's what happens to me. And then I end up with, this guy's no good, he's a bum, he's not even doing AA himself, for God's sakes, right? Because what's happening is I'm being given direction that I don't want to take. I'm being asked to step up to the plate in Alcoholics Anonymous to a level that I don't want to step up to the plate. The other thing that has happened in my life, and this is what has happened more recently in Alcoholics Anonymous, this is what the cause of my recent angst was mostly, is that we'll find a guy in Alcoholics Anonymous that we respect. And we like him, and so we start to build a little pedestal for him. No big deal. I mean, they're your mentors. There are giants in AA that I look up to and that I adore. And I will build a pedestal for my mentors. But I'm an alcoholic, so it needs to be a little bit bigger of a pedestal. And I build it a little bigger, and I build it a little higher, and I sharpen the top a little, and I take the podium where they're supposed to stand, and I make it a little smaller. And I make this tall pedestal with an itty-bitty little platform that nobody could possibly ever stand on. And then I judge them when they fall. And this is what I do in Alcoholics Anonymous. This is what I do. I would say that the only time really for you to change sponsors, and there are exceptions to this. There are exceptions to this. But when, for some reason, your sponsor becomes because of distance or work life or job life or family life, where they become inaccessible and you can't possibly get a hold of them and your lives don't mesh anymore, that would be a time. Or when in agreement with your sponsor, you're going through things that your sponsor says you can get more help, you can grow more without me. And that in conversation with your sponsor, it seems like the right next healthy step for you. But I will tell you, the only time you should not leave your sponsor is when it's based on resentment and fear. That whatever you do first, whether you change sponsors or not, that you find a way through the resentment and the fear. And tongue-in-cheek and joking a little but not really, I would tell you, just knock it off and take the goddamn direction they're giving you. And you might find you don't need to change sponsors. Let's come back at 10 after 2, guys, and we'll move on. 10 after 1. No, 2. What time is it? Holy cow.
Alcoholic. Moving on to steps 8 and 9, page 76 of the big book. Now we need more action, without which we find that faith without works is dead. Let's look at steps 8 and 9. We have made a list of all persons we have harmed and whom we're willing to make amends. We made it when we took inventory. That's known in the sales world as bait and switch. If I had any idea I would have to make amends to all the people I put on my resentment list, my list would have been shorter, no doubt. Now, it's interesting because, you know, your sponsor comes up to you and you got your 8-step list and he says, are you willing to make amends to all these people? Are you willing to set right these wrongs? Remember, in the beginning, it was agreed you'd go to any length for victory over alcohol. And I know the right answer. And I tell my sponsor, yes, I am willing to make amends to all these people, but I am lying. In reality, I have 3 separate lists in my mind. Now, I have lists that he made me make out. He had me make out a list of family members, all the financial institutions I owed money to, all the businesses that I had stolen from, all the women I had been in relationships with. So I had these separate lists, but the 3 lists I'm talking about, I got one list that I'm willing to make amends to those people right now. And those are usually family members that have kind of watched me get sober. I know they kind of approve of what I'm doing. I'm thinking it's not going to be smooth, but it's not going to be bad. You know, I think it's going to go okay. And then I got another list of people. I'm not sure if I'm going to make amends to them. I'm kind of on the fence. I don't know if it's going to go well. There's a lot of apprehension about it. I think maybe one day, perhaps, kind of, maybe, somehow, I'll make amends to them, but not today. We're not doing that today. I'm not ready. And then I have the third list, and those are the people I'm never going to make amends to. Now, I may tell my sponsor I'm going to make amends, but I know in my heart of hearts, this is never going to happen. I'm never going to be in front of those people. There's too much fear. It's going to go too bad. You can't make amends to a drug dealer, for God's sakes. You know, you can't. How am I going to make amends to the IRS? I owe them $80,000. I'm making minimum wage with taxes taken out. Who are you kidding? You know, that's easy for you to say. You know, it's why your sponsor can tell you to go to court and clean up your records. He's not going to jail. I mean, it's that kind of thoughts that I have going on. But what happens to me is I start making amends, and something very unusual happens. Those first amends that I make that I'm pretty sure they're going to go okay. Not only do they go okay, they go better than I thought. In fact, some wonderful things happen in those first amends. And what happens in this second set of amends, the ones I'm not sure I'm going to make, now I start to think I'm pretty sure I'm going to be able to do those too. Because I'm kind of wrong about how things are turning out in the amends process, and I'm feeling better. And that third set of amends, the ones I'm never going to make, I start to become open-minded, which is really what we talk about in the 8th step. It says, if I'm not willing to make those amends, I pray until it comes. But I couple that prayer with action. You see, why I'm praying for God to give me the willingness to make amends to people that I know in my heart of hearts I'm never going to do, I get into action on the amends that I can make. And the results of the actions I'm taking in the amends process in step 9 is changing my heart and my mind more seemingly than the prayer is. That God is working through the people that I'm making amends to change my mind. And I find out we're all connected because things are happening of a spiritual nature I can't explain. You know, there's a word used in 2 different places in the big book in the amends process. I think it's the most important word to keep in mind with the amends, and the word is demonstration. Used in 2 different places. In the second place, it says, it doesn't matter if a man throws us out of his office, it's water over the dam, we've made our spiritual demonstration. But more importantly, there's a place where it says, our man would be more interested in our demonstration of goodwill than our talk of spiritual discoveries. That's on page 77. And why I think that's so important, you know, most people would rather see a sunset than listen to a sermon. You know, all my life I've been telling people how sorry I am, but they already know it. On page 82 on the bottom, it says, an alcoholic is like a tornado roaring his way through the lives of others. Hearts are broken, sweet relationships are dead, affections have been uprooted. Selfish and inconsiderate habits have kept the home in turmoil. We feel a man is unthinking when he says that sobriety is enough. He is like the farmer who came out of his cyclone cellar to find his home ruined. To his wife he remarked, don't see anything the matter here, Ma. Ain't it grand the wind stopped blowing? Yes, there is a long period of reconstruction ahead, and we must take the lead. A remorseful mumbling that we are sorry won't fill the bill at all. The apology is part of the amends. It's the smallest part of the amends. It's a politeness. It's a nicety, but that's not what an amends is about. An amends is about what am I going to change? What am I going to fix? What am I going to change or what am I going to fix in that relationship or that situation? What is going to be my demonstration of goodwill? I learned that from my first sponsor before I even formally got to the amends. I was no more than 4 months sober. My sponsor came up to me and he said, listen, what are you doing in that house where you're getting sober to say thank you to your family for letting them, for you getting sober there? And I said to him, I go, well, I'm not drinking. And he said, that's mighty big of you. He said, I'd like you to go home tonight and ask your sister if there's anything you can do to say thank you. And so I went home to my sister and I said, well, my sponsor wants to know if there's anything I can do to say thank you for you allowing me to get sober in your home. She didn't miss a beat. She said, well, you can paint my house. And I said, your whole house? And she said, yeah. And I said, I got to go talk to my sponsor about this. And I went back to my sponsor and I said, this crazy woman wants me to paint her 3,800 square foot 2-story house. And he said, is she buying the paint? And I said, well, I assume. And he goes, you got off easy, paint her house. And he walked away. And he always used to do this. You'd end our conversations by being real dismissive, saying something and walking away. Paint her house. And I watch his bald head going away. And I yell at the back of his bald head. I said, hey, I thought this program was suggested. That was a mistake, I was to find out. Because I didn't know he could move like that. You know what I mean? Like, he was back in my personal space before I realized it. And he's looking up at me, and I'm looking down on him, and he's pointing that finger up at me, and he says, Don, you're so sick that anything that comes out of my mouth from this point forward, I want you to assume it's a direction. And we'll let you know when you've passed into the suggestion phase of the program. So I'm painting her house. And what I didn't know about my sponsor is, my sponsor was a student of the Big Book. And I was talking to him about my sister and our relationship and how she was my favorite person on the planet. And because I had treated her so poorly and broke her heart so many times over the years, that although I was sober and going to Alcoholics Anonymous, there was something between us. There was a wall between us. It was hard for us to be in the same room at the same time for any real length of time. We couldn't really talk in an open manner. There was something in the room at all times that was kind of cutting us off from each other. And I felt terrible about that. I felt awkward around her. I felt embarrassed around her. I felt shameful around her. And it was cutting me off from her. And my sponsor understood that that demonstration of goodwill was going to be exactly what was needed in that situation. It would have been easy for me to go to my sister and say, hey, you know what? I'm sorry I stole your car and stole your dough and broke your heart, but I'm in AA and I found God. We're all good, right? But my sponsor knew what the men's were really about. And I'll never know for sure what it did for my sister by me painting her house. I mean, I know she said it caused a great healing in her life, but I know what it did for me. It seemed like the longer I was into that project, that awkwardness, that uncomfortability I had around my sister, it just diminished just a little bit. And it's not like when I was done with it that we were all even Steven. No, there was a long period of reconstruction ahead, like the Big Book says. But you know what? I could be in the same room at the same time with my sister, breathing the same air. And Alcoholics Anonymous, and the amends process in particular, gave me back probably one of my favorite human beings on the planet, gave me my relationship with my sister back. And when we talked about it years later, she said, I couldn't believe you were painting my house. I know who you are, and that wasn't you. And not only did you do it, you did it with a pretty good attitude. And I watched you, and I said, something's happened to him, and I don't understand what it is, but I liked it because I was getting my house painted. And she goes, and I realized that this thing called Alcoholics Anonymous was actually showing up in your life. She goes, I saw you doing things I never thought you were capable of before. And so I started to be healed by the action suggested in Alcoholics Anonymous. My family started to be healed by that demonstration of goodwill, not sweet promises, not I'm so sorry, not it's going to be different in the future. Now it's going to, I showed them with my actions that I was sorry. I showed them with my actions I wanted to make it right. My sponsor instructed me on how I was going to make amends with everybody. He had a very specific format. He said, you will make an appointment with everybody you're going to see. We are not going to ambush anyone. He said, Don, we are handcuffed. I said, what are we handcuffed by? He said, your perception of reality. He goes, if you drank as much whiskey as you say you did, who knows what really happened? And that's true. Even to this day, I have this problem. I mean, it's a character defect of sorts. Because of the work I've done in AA and the steps, I understand that occasionally I hurt other people. But when I hurt other people and realize I've done it, I almost instantaneously know how bad I hurt you, how pissed off you should be, what it should take for you to get over it, and how long that should take. And I don't need to talk to you about it. I just know. And I'm always wrong. And I first learned about that in the amends process. He said, you will call them up and you will make an appointment and you will tell them why you are coming. You will tell them you become a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and part of what you have to do is make restitution for people you feel like you've harmed, and you feel that you've harmed them. And you would like to come have a conversation about that with them. And you have to ask something of them, and you tell them if they are brave enough and courageous enough, and although you don't have the right to ask, if they would be willing to tell you how your behavior has affected them and what they think would be required for you to make that right, you would really appreciate that. And I told my sponsor, I said, this is a bad idea. And the reason he did that is he didn't want me to be the ambush. He didn't want me the guy that calls up his Aunt Sally and goes, hey, Aunt Sally, how's it going? Oh, Donald, how are you? Still going to the A&A? Well, I sure am, Aunt Sally. Hey, Aunt Sally, can I come over and see you? Oh, what would that be about? Well, what, I can't come see my favorite aunt? And I show up at my Aunt Sally's and I lay this heavy-handed amends on her. And at the end of the amends, I say to her, Aunt Sally, would you be kind enough to tell me how my behavior has affected you and what I could do to make this right? Aunt Sally didn't know I was coming. Aunt Sally doesn't know anything about AA. Aunt Sally doesn't know how important it is that I get the truth. And what does Aunt Sally say? She's seeing me sober for the first time, and I don't know, forever. You think she's really going to tell me how I've affected her? What I really have to do to make it right? Or is she going to say something like this? Oh, baby, 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 baby. We've always just loved you and wanted good things for you. You don't have to worry about that money you owe me. You don't have to worry about all those things. You know what? You just stay sober. That's all we really want from you. You want to make it right? That's how you can make it right. You just stay sober and you have a good life. And I think to myself, self-centered, grandiose alcoholic, whoo, that was close. And I don't understand. I've just screwed myself out of the biggest gift that you can ever get around here, and that's the truth. Because I'm not going to get to the truth without the participation of the people that I've damaged. Because I'm only armed with my perception of reality. I don't know how I've hurt them. I sat down with my sister to make amends. And I talked about stealing their car and stealing their money and missing the graduations and missing the celebrations and missing the high holidays and not being an absentee craphead brother. And I got done and I asked how my behavior had affected her. She goes, "You think this is how you hurt me?" And I said, "Yeah, that's my perception of it." And she said, "You are wrong." She said, "You don't know what it's like. You don't know what it's like to love somebody as much as I love you. And when I ask you how you're doing, you say couldn't be better. And I'm watching you die by inches. You don't know what it's like. You don't know what it's like when the phone rings at my house and it's after 10 o'clock at night. I know it's them calling me to tell me I'm never going to see my baby brother again." That always gets me. You don't know what it's like. And I didn't know what it was like to love an alcoholic. You know, I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm singing a very old familiar song. The only person I hurt was myself. And I go into the amends process, eyeball to eyeball, shoulder to shoulder, chest to chest with these people I've damaged. And I gave them the dignity and respect that Alcoholics Anonymous requires of me as a recovering alcoholic to hear their side of the story. And to find out how I had damaged people and to find out what I had to do to make it right. And to understand there was a long period of reconstruction ahead. I remember going to my mother and making amends, and I had been a terrible son to my mother. And I owed her a great deal of money, and I was hung up on all the money I owed her, and I'm talking about the things I felt I had done wrong, and we got to the part where I wanted to hear from her, and she told me a story I'd completely forgotten. And a few years before I got sober, my mother lives in Lexington, Kentucky, and she's not a woman of means, right? And word had gotten back to her that her baby boy was drinking himself to death. My sister had called her and said, "Listen, if you want to see Donald, I'd do it quickly because I don't know if he's going to be around much longer." And it scared the hell out of my mom. And my mom called me up and put a plan together, and she said, "Why don't you come see me at Christmas? You know, we haven't seen each other in a while, and I love Lexington at Christmas time. They really do the town up. It's just beautiful. It'd be my treat. I'll buy the ticket and everything." And I'm so self-centered. When my mother offered a grown man and she's going to pay for me to come to Lexington, I thought to myself, I'd do her a favor. Throw the old girl a thrill. Go out there on Christmas. And I said, "Yep, I'll come out." And you know, I meant to go. I really did. But you know, the night before the flight, I went to the bar, and wouldn't you know it, I fell in love. And I woke up the next morning laying there naked next to a stranger, and I look at the clock, and I've missed the plane. And you know what you do when you're a real man? You pick up the phone, you take the heat, you say, "You're sorry, I missed a plane. I don't know what to tell you. I'm a screw up." But you know, that might make me feel bad, and I don't want to feel bad. So I just took another pull off the jug, and I went back to sleep. And now you turn the camera to Lexington, Kentucky, and this woman wakes up in her little humble home, you know, and she's excited. And it's kind of that winter weather they get in Lexington. It's kind of sleeting outside. It's cold outside. But my mother said to her it was a beautiful spring day because her heart was full because she was going to see her baby boy. And she knew he was in trouble, and she knew he was in trouble with the drink, but she thought, if I can get him in front of me, I could talk some sense into him. I could love in him, you know, and maybe we can come up with a solution for this. And she got in that old car she owned, and she drove down to the Lexington airport on those icy streets, and she said she didn't even notice the weather, how bad it was. She said, "My heart was beating like a little bird. I was so excited." And it was back in the days before 9/11. She parked the car, and she walked out in the tarmac. She's clutching her umbrella, and she watches my plane come in. And she's so excited, and she's watching people get off the plane. "No, that's not him. He's not tall enough. No, that's not him." And finally, all the passengers are off, and the flight crew's off. And finally, the pilot and the co-pilot are walking by my mother. And my mother grabs the pilot and goes, "You know, there must be some mistake. My son is on that plane. I haven't seen him come off yet." And he says, "Lady, I don't know what to tell you. Maybe he missed the flight. There's nobody left on that plane." And my mother said it was at that moment she noticed the weather for the first time. And she felt the cold on her face. And she said she walked back to her car, and she was so shaky she couldn't drive. She just put her head down. She cried for half an hour straight. And she said, "I knew I'd lost you to the drink, and I knew you were going to die. And I knew there was nothing I could do for you." And I came to Alcoholics Anonymous singing an old familiar song that the only person I hurt was myself. And I'm so grateful for the amends process that I gave people the respect and dignity that the program requires out of a recovering alcoholic to hear their side of the story and let them talk to me about how I really damaged them. Because I came out of those family amends, and I didn't know much, but I knew this. I never want to be that guy again. I never want to look at my mother and see tears in her eyes and know they're of sorrow rather than joy. And because of Alcoholics Anonymous, I've been able to make these family amends, be an active member in my family's dynamic for all these years because of good sponsorship and what you guys have given me. My mother wants you to know that she doesn't cry herself to sleep at night anymore. that she loves Alcoholics Anonymous and she loves what it's done for her baby boy, and she thanks you from the bottom of her heart. I owed my mother a great deal of money. I didn't know how much I owed her. I said, how about if I send you $100 a month for life? And she said, beautiful. And I remember I sent that first check off, and a couple weeks later I get a call from my mom, and my mom's hysterical on the phone. She's crying and she's blithering. And I said, Mom, what's going on? She's, oh, Mom, put it together. Use your words. What are you trying to tell me? And she finally catches her breath and she says, when did you get a checking account? Give you an idea of the kind of loser I am. Our big book says most alcoholics owe money. We do not dodge our creditors. Bad news. Bad news. Like Sheldon says, Stave Satan 9, they're expensive. I remember owing the IRS $80,000. I made a lot of small financial amends, but I knew I'd never be able to make that one. And I was about 2 years sober, and I started waking up in dread and fear of being caught by the IRS because I knew they'd catch up. And what am I going to tell them 2 years sober in Alcoholics Anonymous when they catch me? What am I going to say? Oh, I was just about to call you. You know what I mean? And one day, the fear of being broke was less than the fear of the IRS. And I decided I'd rather be broke the rest of my life than not face the heat. And I called the IRS, and they answered the phone in those days, Internal Revenue Service, and I hung up on them, you know what I mean? And I called them right back, and I found out that God's kids work at the IRS. And I entered into a payment agreement to send them $100 a month. I remember sending that first check off and thinking to myself, oh, good, $79,900 to go. And funny thing happened, man, and we agnostics, we read that God's everything or else he's nothing. What was our choice to be? The minute I started paying back the IRS, funny thing happened. I started getting better jobs. I started making more money. Now, I didn't have any more money. As my sponsor explained to me, oh, don't worry about it, kid. They don't want your money. Oh, they don't? No, they want their money. So I just made more of their money to pay them back. And you know, I remember too, man, I was finally making some good money, and I had 1 month where I had paid all my amends. We were saving for a wedding, Eileen and I, and we had made all our financial amends that month, and there was a surplus. I hadn't had a surplus in 5 years. I've been living hand to mouth for 5 years. And it wasn't, it wasn't a ton of money, but to me it was a fortune, right? It was $3,000. And I couldn't believe it. I didn't know what I was going to buy first. And I went to my wife-to-be and I said, I have this $3,000 surplus. Isn't this great? Maybe I'll get golf clubs. Maybe I'll buy a big screen TV. Maybe I'll take a trip. And my wife-to-be says to me, well, you should probably send it to the IRS. And I started yelling at her, 5 minutes. You can't let me be happy for 5 minutes, And I'm not going to send the money off. But I call my sponsor because that's what we do. And my sponsor goes, I'm not going to tell you have to send it to him. I'm just going to tell you probably should. So now I can't talk to him because he's an idiot. And I don't send the money off to the IRS. I just leave it in my checking account where it mocks me for about 4 weeks. Finally, I can't take the pain anymore because I just know I got to do the right thing. And I bitterly write this check to the IRS, Internal Revenue Service, $3,000, and just bitter. And I mail it off and I wait for the spiritual gift. You know what I mean? I know I'm going to feel better any minute. And I feel worse. A week goes by and I feel really bad. And now I really regret sending them the money. And now I'm pissed at my sponsor. I'm pissed at my wife. I call my sponsor up and I go, hey, man, I just sent that money to the IRS. He goes, I know. And I go, when am I going to feel better about this? He goes, I don't know, Don, someday. I'm thinking, he's got no answer. So you fast forward a couple of years. Eileen and I are in escrow in our first house. A couple of loser drunks. They gave us a loan. We couldn't believe it. And we're getting down to the finish line. And Eileen's afraid we'll get tripped up. She goes, you should call the IRS, find out what your balance is. We don't want to get tripped up at the finish line. By this time, I have a direct line to my own agent, right? This guy named Bill. So I call Bill up and I go, Bill, it's Don. He goes, Don, how are you? I go, great, Bill. How are the kids? Oh, growing like weeds. Thanks for asking. What do you need, Don? And I said, well, you know what, Bill, I'm just checking on my balance. He goes, okie dokie, and he puts me on hold. He comes back and he says, Don, it's the funniest thing. You've actually overpaid by $400. Would you like us to send you a check? Let me tell you, if you send every spare nickel that you owed or that you had to the IRS for about 5 years straight, your answer sounds a little bit like this. You bet your ass. And I called my sponsor up and I said, remember when you told me one day I'd feel better about that money I owed the IRS? He goes, yeah. I go, today's the day. And the truth is, some of these amends, when are we going to feel better about them? When they're complete. When they're complete. So anyway, that's all I got for right now. I'm going to turn it over to my friend Sheldon.
Just a couple of stories about amends. That when I got sober, I had been living in, actually not far from Don. I'd been living just outside of Tacoma. I was living in a place called Bremerton, and I was driving through Tacoma while I was drinking one time, and I was sober at the time I was driving, but I didn't have a driver's license. And they take that seriously up there. I got pulled over, and I got a ticket for driving on a suspended license. Now, I never checked out what that fine was, and I don't know if the story I'm about to tell you is true or not, but while I was getting loaded and getting drunk with a couple of guys afterwards later on that day, they told me a story that I assumed was true. And they told me that there'd been a crackdown on that in that county, and that if you got arrested, first offense for driving on a suspended license, you had to do 9 months in jail. There was no way around it. Now, I never asked anybody at the court if that was true. Why would you? I got my drunken buddies telling me a story. They all agreed with each other, so I assumed it was true, so I did the only thing that I could do. I moved. I moved to New Jersey, and this is back before computers were connecting every different state and county. I moved to New Jersey, got a New Jersey driver's license, moved from New Jersey back to Southern California, used my New Jersey driver's license to get my California driver's license. I got a driver's license. I moved to Nevada. I have my California driver's license. I get a Nevada driver's license. The fact that I had had a suspended license at some point in the past and gotten in trouble for driving on it in Tacoma meant nothing to me. It meant nothing to me. But I'm telling my sponsor about this stuff because, oh, you should probably clean that up. And as I get sober and I'm driving around in Nevada, I start noticing cops. And I'm just sure that I know what's going to happen. I'm going to get pulled over. Now, computers are getting more prevalent. I'm hearing stories of guys that have got warrants in different states, that now everything's connected. And I know what's going to happen. I'm going to be sober a year, 2 years sober, driving along. I'm going to get pulled over, get hauled out of the car. I'm going to get transported up to Tacoma, and it's going to be on the local AA club newsletter that Sheldon just went to jail sober for driving on a suspended license, and it's starting to make me crazy. And I'm starting to think I need to make this amends. But there's a caveat to the amends. It says except when to do so would injure them or others. So I have this conversation with my wife about how I think I'm going to have to go to jail in Tacoma, and I don't want to go, but I think I'm going to have to. I got to clean this up, unless, of course, it would be a great hardship for you if it would injure you terribly, I will suffer and not go. And she says, well, you know, I know you already know this, honey. When I left Florida to move to Las Vegas where we met, I had had a DUI not long before I left Florida. And I got that hanging over my head. And I don't mind if you go to Tacoma and take care of your stuff, but I'm going to have to go to Florida. And it's my third one. I'm probably going to do a year. If you're okay with the hardship that'll cause you, I'm okay. I said, well, no, I can't live without you for a year, honey. I will not give you permission to go to Florida. Absolutely not. And she said, well, I will not give you permission to go to Tacoma. And so for the next couple of years, we just had this pact. Where I would not let her go to Florida as much as she said she wanted to, and she would not let me go to Tacoma as much as I begged. But it got to me, and it got to me more and more, and I called my sponsor, and I told him, and he said, why don't you do this? This is back in the days of payphones. He said, why don't you go to a payphone where they won't know who you are or where you're calling from, and call up Tacoma and tell them about this ticket and ask them